Hi, I'm Lauren Hamilton, accountant for therapists. Today I wanted to talk more about therapists who are working maybe a full-time job, who are earning a paycheck, and who are also doing either a side job or a side hustle as a therapist outside of their full-time job. And what that might look like as far as business expenses go, and what you can expect to pay for taxes come tax time. So let's jump into it. So I was recently at a conference with the SCCA, which is the South Carolina chapter of the Counseling Association. And in one of the sessions that I was hosting, I got a lot of questions from therapists who are working a full-time job, who, are receiving a paycheck, each month, or, however frequently you are, and also doing either starting their practice on the side, or doing some things outside of their full-time job, and what that means as far as taxes go and business expenses, and how to keep those things separate. So the way that situation works, if you find yourself in a similar situation, if your full-time job is, and it may not necessarily be in therapy or counseling or anything like that, maybe you're something completely different, but you are earning income or wages from that employer. So at the end of the year, you're going to receive what's called a W-2 form. So all that W-2 form is just an annual summary of the amount of wages that you were paid during the year, the amount of taxes that were withheld from your income. So that could be, federal withholdings, and it could be state withholdings, and then also your Social Security, Medicare. You could have retirement plans that are through that employer. So if you had any contributions there, those will be listed there. Same with maybe health insurance benefits, anything like that. That's all going to be on that W-2 form. So when you go to file your income tax return, or what's also known as a 1040, that is the information that you will put from the W-2 form will go onto that 1040. So that is a very, basic sequence for people who are employed by an employer. So let's also take that and then add on that you are working a side job for yourself. So you are going somewhere and maybe providing therapy services, and at the end of the year you receive another form that is called a 1099 NEC, which the NEC just stands for non-employee compensation. So that means that you were not an employee of whoever was paying you for whatever services you were providing. So if you are one of those that gets a 1099 at the end of the year showing the amount of income that you were paid from that other provider, or I guess entity. So if you are earning money from another entity, then that is when a 1099 is issued. And the limits for that have changed, and that's a whole nother separate discussion. But for year 2026, if you earn more than $2,000 from a separate entity, then they will need to issue a 1099 NEC to you at the end of 2026. So all of that to say, you could be a employee who is getting a W-2 form. You could also be somebody who is working for yourself part-time and earning 1099 income. And what that will look like if you are earning 1099 income is that you will actually be considered, you could have business expenses with that. So if you are marketing yourself, if you are using software that you are paying for this, specific part-time endeavor, I guess for the sake of this example, I'm just going to assume that it's part-time therapy work. So, if you're having to take notes and, scheduling and invoicing and, everything that kind of goes into that, that is considered an expense. The other question that I got in one of the sessions was talking about travel expenses. So if you are somebody that does not necessarily have an office that you have sessions out of, and maybe you travel to the person who you're meeting with, then that would be considered a business expense. So you would want to capture those mileage amounts. And that could be another video at some point, but those would be business expenses that you could use to offset that 1099 income, so that way your tax liability is not as high. But just keep in mind that the expenses that you are incurring for your part-time therapy practice does not touch your W-2 income. So if you, as an employee, went to a conference or traveled for any reason and your employer did not reimburse you for those expenses, those you cannot claim on your tax return as a business expense because they happened under your employee designation. If your employer did reimburse you for those, then it's basically a cash in, cash out. It doesn't necessarily matter, but you personally cannot then claim those expenses as a business expense on your individual return. Now, if those expenses happened as, under your part-time therapy practice, those would be considered business expenses under that entity. So the other question could be, well, what if you have insurance that covers you as part-time therapist in your own private practice, but is also covering you as an employee, to an employer? So maybe thinking more about like malpractice or liability insurance that you might have for yourself there. You would need to allocate the amount that would apply to your part-time therapy business versus employee. Because again, if the employee portion you are paying yourself and not getting reimbursed for by your employer, you cannot claim that, unfortunately. There used to be years ago where you could claim up to a certain amount of unreimbursed employee expenses, at least in year 2026. That's not the case. So going back to the insurance example, if the amount of insurance that you are paying does cover for your private practice like part-time, you can allocate a portion of that would fall under, that activity. So while you're working on getting your private practice up, and if you're working part-time to kind of get that started, which a lot of people do, so there are a lot of situations where you could be a full-time employee and earning a W-2 income, and you're also doing something part-time and earning 1099 income. So there are a little bit of a difference there in what you can claim as far as expenses go. The main thing is that anything that happens while you are an employee, you cannot take. But if it happens as a business expense for your part-time income, then you would be more likely to take that as a business expense. Obviously, I don't want to make a blanket statement that you can take all of it because, there could be certain situations and that kind of thing. So it would depend on your specific situation, but as a whole, W-2, you can't claim any expenses. 1099, you can claim some expenses. So it'd be really good to talk to your tax preparer or accountant about that, just so that way you can make sure you're keeping up with that during the year, especially if you are just getting started, and again, making sure that you're not paying more taxes than what you really need to, especially given the fact that there are, deductions and things like that that are legal for you to take in order to not pay a full tax rate on that income that you're earning as a 1099. I do this a lot for my clients as well, so if you have any other questions about that, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to walk through that with you. If you found this video helpful, please like and share it. We love to support those in the same space, so appreciate you guys doing that. If you have any other questions about tax situations or maybe something that you're questioning and would like more information about, please put that in the comments so that way I can see that and continue to support you the best way I know how. Until next time, be well.